Hello and welcome. I am Devika Diwan and you're watching NewsX World. Let's begin with the headlines this hour. Beijing is set to host the SCO summit military parade this week. World leaders, including Russia and India, are scheduled to attend the high-stakes meet, where influence and alliances will be showcased. Prime Minister of India Narendra Modi has arrived in China, where he was warmly welcomed ahead of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization summit in Tianjin. He will be joining President Xi Jinping, Russian President Vladimir Putin, and more than 20 world leaders. French Foreign Minister Jean-Noël Barrot has stated that the United States should not block visas for Palestinian Authority officials to attend next month's UN General Assembly. EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas has declared that Russia will not regain access to the $245.8 billion in frozen assets unless it pays reparations for the war in Ukraine. The head of the International Red Cross has warned that Israel's plan for a mass evacuation of Gaza City is impossible, citing the lack of infrastructure to move people safely and in time. The statement has come today as Israel moves forward with shelling of Gaza to destroy Hamas entirely. Ukrainian lawmaker and former parliamentary speaker Andrew Parubi was shot dead in a hail of bullets in Lviv. A killing President Volodymyr Zelensky is condemned as a horrific murder. Authorities have launched a full-scale investigation into the attack, according to official statements. Ukraine's military has said that it struck 2 Russian oil refineries overnight, targeting facilities in Krasnodar and Syzran, with explosions and a fire reported at Krasnodar plant. The attack marks yet another escalation in the war. French unions have called for a nationwide strike on the 18th of September to protest Prime Minister François Bayrou's 44 billion euros austerity plan, with union leaders blasting the budget as a horror show. The strikes, coming ahead of a September 8 confidence vote that could force Bayrou to resign, adds pressure on President Emmanuel Macron. And our top focus: at a United Nations Security Council meeting in New York on Friday, China has reiterated its support for all efforts aimed at achieving a peaceful settlement of the Ukraine crisis. The Chinese UN Deputy Representative Zhen Shuang emphasized the importance of calm and restraint from all parties involved to de-escalate the conflict. Let's listen in to what he had to say.
从战争爆发第一天起，中方就呼吁停火止战，坚持劝和促谈，推动政治解决。我们以习近平主席提出的4个应该为根本遵循，同当事方保持接触，派出特使开展穿梭外交，并在联合国发起成立乌克兰危机和平之友小组，凝聚和平共识，推动和平努力。中方愿继续同国际社会一道，为推动危机的早日政治解决发挥建设性作用。
Additionally, Zheng mentioned that China welcomed recent discussions that happened between Russia and the United States, and also between Ukraine and Europe. China has consistently advocated for a ceasefire and political solution since the onset of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February by Russia 2022. That's the latest that we're tracking on the Russia-Ukraine crisis. Joining me on the broadcast is Mr. Andrew Hlaing, Professor of International Relations. Mr. Hlaing, I have to, of course, begin by asking you, China's statement on the Russia-Ukraine war, what exactly do you make of China's support for, of course, de-escalation, but at the same time, in the current global scenario, China now commenting on the crisis?
Well, it's of a piece with their 12-point plan floated a while back. There's 2 aspects to it. On the one hand, this is China telling the global South, its natural constituency, what it wants to hear. No sanctions, non-interference, respecting borders, et cetera, et cetera. Positioning itself as a natural leader in the global south and perhaps beyond the global south. This has been China's modus operandi for the last several years, certainly under President Xi Jinping's, during his administration. So there's nothing surprising there. It's also about drawing a clearer distinction between China and the US. Now, Donald Trump's recent pivot towards a less confrontational approach, and he himself talking more about peace and a negotiated settlement, et cetera, takes a little bit of the steam out of China's argument. But what China has done, what Beijing has done, is double down. No, we're really serious, they're saying, about non-interference, about we're the peacemakers. We are not the Americans. We are more responsible and more committed to those values and virtues which the global south espouses.
Ms. Latham, stay on with us because we have more news coming on the same front. We're now learning that German Chancellor Friedrich Merz has called for Russia's aggression against Ukraine to be made economically unviable, asserting that the war will not end until Moscow faces significant economic pressure. Speaking at a local party summit in Bonn, Merz emphasized Europe's unity in responding to the crisis, highlighting the collaborative efforts with EU leaders and US President Donald Trump. Merz also stressed Germany's leadership role in Europe, pointing to NATO's reformed defense policy and Germany's increased contributions. He reiterated that European security is inseparably linked to Germany's foreign policy, warning that without a strong Europe, domestic challenges will remain unresolved. Let's listen into what he had to say before we bring back Mr. Andrew Latham.
Wir bemühen uns intensivst auf allen Wegen, das Ende dieses schrecklichen Krieges herbeizuführen. Aber alle Bemühungen der letzten Wochen sind beantwortet worden mit einer noch aggressiveren Vorgehensweise dieses Regimes aus Moskau gegen die Bevölkerung in der Ukraine. Und das wird auch so lange nicht aufhören, bis wir nicht gemeinsam dafür gesorgt haben, dass Russland diesen Krieg zumindest aus wirtschaftlichen Gründen, vielleicht auch aus militärischen Gründen, jedenfalls aus wirtschaftlichen Gründen, nicht länger führen kann. Wir sind vollkommen geschlossen dort in dieses Gespräch gegangen. Wir haben das intensivst vorbereitet. Es gab an keiner Stelle irgendeine Abweichung von der gemeinsamen Auffassung, wie wir etwa mit dem Ukraine-Krieg umgehen, wie wir mit Russland umgehen, was wir jetzt gemeinsam zu tun haben. Und ich nehme das mal selbstbewusst für mich in Anspruch. Wenn der deutsche Bundeskanzler diese Arbeit nicht leistet, die Europäer zusammenzuhalten und gerade in einer solchen Frage von Krieg und Frieden dafür zu sorgen, dass es Geschlossenheit gibt auf der europäischen Ebene, wenn der deutsche Bundeskanzler das nicht macht, dann macht es sonst niemand in Europa, liebe Freundinnen und Freunde. Und deswegen ist das der Auftrag, den ich genauso.
Interesting. Mr. Andrew Latham back with us on the broadcast. Mr. Latham, I want to understand from your perspective, with the EU hoping to now unite in its efforts to make the war in Ukraine economically unviable for Russia, what exactly does that mean? Because we've seen that sanctions have had very little impact.
Yes, sanctions have had very little impact because Europe, and especially Germany, are heavily dependent on Russian oil and gas. So this, if Chancellor Merz is serious, this is a substantial pivot. Maybe Europe now will get serious about minimizing the flow of revenue to Russia via various backdoors and alternate channels that is allowing President Putin to perpetuate this war. He needs income. And he's finding income not just from India, which of course has made the news in India and in Washington, but more to the point, he's making a lot of money off China, and he's making a lot of money off the Europeans, and that's financing his war. So it's clear that India is not going to change its policy. It's clear that China is not going to change its policy when it comes to acquiring Russian oil and gas. And that leaves the Europeans in a position, perhaps, if they can get their act together internally, to tip the balance and to increase the pressure on the Putin administration to bring this war to at least a ceasefire, if not a permanent end.
Right. Mr. Latham, stay on with us. We have more news coming in. Ukraine has opened a murder investigation after former parliamentary speaker Andriy Parubi was shot dead in the western city of Lviv. According to the Prosecutor General's office, Parubi was shot multiple times by gunmen who then fled the situation. Authorities have launched a manhunt to find the attacker. Parubi was a prominent figure in Ukraine's 2014 Maidan revolution and served as parliamentary speaker from 2016 to 2019. He was also a key leader in the protests that led to Ukraine's push for closer ties with the European Union. Mr. Andrew Latham with us on the broadcast. Mr. Latham, how exactly does the assassination of a prominent, one can say, pro-Western figure like Parubi impact the U.S. strategy of supporting Ukraine's democratic institutions and also its push for closer ties with the European Union?
Well, we have to recognize, as I'm sure your listeners and viewers know, that the population of Ukraine pre-2014 was divided. Those who wanted closer relations with Russia versus those who wanted closer relations with the West, the European Union, and even NATO membership. And that was decided by what some people refer to as a coup in 2014. I'm not sure that's an apt and accurate description, but there certainly was a profound change of government, and the pro-Western forces came to power. And that's where this particular gentleman figures quite prominently. Now, it's been over 10 years since then, although he's played a prominent role in Ukrainian politics. One wonders aloud if the person who pulled the trigger, as it were, was a Russian special operator of some sort, intelligence agent, or whether it was one of those pro-Russian Ukrainians who simply is settling a very old score at this point. We'll have to wait for the investigation to unfold. I rather suspect that it's a domestic assassin, and I rather suspect it's tied to those still deep divisions within Ukraine regarding Ukraine's ultimate geopolitical orientation, eastward or westward.
Interesting. Mr. Latham, as a follow-up, I want to understand, in your assessment, you say that you think that the assassination could be tied to domestic politics, but of course, there are sources that continue to blame Russia for it. What does this really mean as far as the conflict with Russia then is concerned? Do you think that this could become another sour point?
Well, it will become, already has become something of a rallying point within Ukraine. Russia, Russia, Russia is always the refrain, and that doesn't surprise me. Russia obviously is up to no good when it comes to Ukraine. But this is something a little different. The very public assassination of a very prominent political actor who was one of the driving forces behind Ukraine's reorientation westward back post-2014. It may well be that the Russians, I'm not sure what the value added for the Russians are in assassinating this figure, but there may be things going on beneath the surface or behind the curtain that we're not aware of at this point. But my instinct, my political antennae are telling me that this is a domestic assassination, which is why it's proven to be so scary to many Ukrainians. Are we now ushering in a new era, not just a foreign invasion and separatism in Donbass, but political violence in the form of assassinations and whatnot that really hasn't been part of the picture in Ukraine thus far?
Interesting, Mr. Latham. What does this then signify about the state of internal politics in Ukraine right now? Of course, Zelensky is in the middle of a war. What does this truly mean for him and his future and the futures of other leaders who are leading the war at this point in time?
Well, that's a very interesting question. On the one hand, President Zelensky's popularity has been in steady decline within Ukraine for quite some time. Numerous sites of opposition, those who want to negotiate, are willing to negotiate away those eastern oblasts, those whose relatives have been wounded, sometimes grievously, or been killed in this war and are tired of it. And the war is not going well. And so it's not surprising that the man who postured as the public face of a successful Ukrainian war effort is not faring well now that the war effort is not faring well. But that's qualitatively different from, so that's a political opposition. That's qualitatively different from assassinations and that kind of political violence. And that's where I think we might have hit something of a tipping point in Ukrainian domestic politics, moving from those kinds of the guardrails have come down, and the political opposition may be morphing into something more violent and less parliamentary and democratic.
All right, Ms. Latham, thank you so much for joining us on the broadcast with that perspective. We leave it there and we shift our focus to other big developments taking place globally. The 2025 Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit is set to make history, taking place in Tianjin, China. It will be the largest SCO gathering to date, with over 20 world leaders discussing key issues like security, trade, and food security. New topics like cyber defense, AI, and Belarus's formal membership will also be on the agenda. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev, and Maldivian President Mohammad Mizu have already arrived in Tianjin for the summit, scheduled for 31st of August till the 1st of September. Myanmar's Aung Hlaing has met with President Xi Jinping in Tianjin, joining prior meetings with Nepal's KP Sharma Oli and Kazakhstan's Kasim Jomart Tokayev. Nepal's Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli expressed his gratitude, saying he was pleased to meet President Xi Jinping once again. He highlighted that their bilateral talks were productive and emphasized Nepal's commitment to further enhancing cooperation with China. This summit marks the 25th anniversary of the SCO, with over 10 international organizations participate in the same. We are expecting many bilateral meetings as far as the SCO summit is concerned. We are expecting the heads of India and China to meet. We're also expecting a meeting between the Prime Minister of India and President of Russia, Vladimir Putin, at the SCO summit. The focus of the SCO summit this year will perhaps be on trade talks, negotiations, and strengthening of bilateral relations between the member countries. Remember, this particular summit comes amid several recent global events, conflicts, as well as current tensions over the American tariffs. I have with me Mr. Scott Faulkner, head of Eagle Enterprises, a security firm, who's joining us live from Washington. Mr. Faulkner, as I've just tried to explain to our audience as well, it's an interesting time for the SCO Summit 2025. You're joining us from the United States of America, so I must ask you first, what really is the reading of the SCO Summit and all the news that's coming in of the bilateral meetings and the trade talks that are likely to take place in the US? How is America reading the developments that are taking place in the other part of the world?
Right. Well, I think the first thing is that they know that China and a lot of the players in China right now, it's going to be a huge photo op. I mean, the greeting ceremonies for some of these heads of state have already been very dramatic, very visually engaging. The question becomes, does the SCO really have an overall agenda beyond just simply not only aggrandizing China, but in essence, rehabilitating Putin, rehabilitating Kim from North Korea? I mean, here are the people who are pariahs, and they're on the world stage here in China. So it's going to be interesting to see whether the visuals are going to be backed up by any real substantive activity, collectively, and of course, the different bilaterals. It comes at an interesting time, as you mentioned, on many fronts. One is that a U.S. appeals court struck down Trump's tariffs just a couple days ago, and rendering them illegal, saying, and unconstitutional, because the 1977 emergency powers that Trump has invoked, they say, really are not relevant and do not hold jurisdiction for this particular set of tariffs. So that's going to be an interesting thing. The other is that all these countries, especially India, are under major tariffs from Trump. Will this court case affect those? On the other front, Trump just yesterday announced the de minimis waiver being removed, which means going back literally decades, that no matter what tariff arrangements and trade arrangements are in effect, any individual unit being imported to the U.S. under $800 was exempt from any of these things. Now they are not. And there's already been a number of countries who are saying we're not going to ship into the United States at all, almost like an embargo. So there's just a lot of wheels turning, and it's going to be interesting to see how all those, in front of the camera meetings, but more importantly behind the camera meetings, are going to play out as against that backdrop.
Mr. Faulkner, at the same time, if there is something substantial that comes off this summit in terms of trade relations and a renewed understanding of business between the nations, is that something that's going to send alarm bells or ring alarm bells rather in the US?
I don't know if it'll be alarm bells, but it definitely is going to be something that the United States and certainly Trump and his trade people are going to have to take into account. With, again, how much is rhetoric, how much is reality is going to have to be seen. But the key is that given Trump's actions in the last, like the de minimis thing, and also this court case, and also his appointing of a new ambassador to India, who is not viewed as necessarily some people think he'll be a Trump enforcer versus a olive branch to India. All these things are happening, and the timing couldn't be worse in some ways for the United States, because all of these countries that really, except for India, because I think India is sort of more of an honest broker in the world, a lot of these countries want to be a counterbalance or an alternative to the United States, and there's just a lot of things in play. And so having all these activities going on, it's going to be an interesting thing to see. Again, are there going to be public pronouncements? Are there going to be behind the scenes deals that will be known maybe months from now? It's going to be an interesting, it's an interesting moment, and a lot of things that America, especially Trump, would like to do are probably at risk at the moment.
Mr. Faulkner, interestingly, you've spoken about an alternative to Western groupings. Do you think that currently the SCO has what it takes to present that alternative option to the world, or what will it take?
I don't think it does. There are just too many countries involved that have internal problems. Is China going to continue to embrace or try to openly embrace Russia's invasion of Ukraine? Is Pakistan and India really going to bury the hatchet? Are there going to be is China and India going to resolve all their border disputes and water resources disputes? This is a forum. It's always good for people to talk, both in front of the cameras and behind the scenes. But in terms of, again, I've looked at this like a since the United Nations Secretary General's there, it's almost like a mini United Nations General Assembly that usually takes place in late September in the United States. Just because everyone is in one room doesn't necessarily mean anything major might happen. There's just so many fundamental issues that are not going to get resolved because everyone's shaking hands in front of the cameras. It's going to, but again, a power play by China, the visuals that China are going to use for internal and external use, they're going to definitely get those photo ops on an epic scale.
All right, Mr. Faulkner, stay on with us as we shift our focus from the SCO summit to other news. Pro-Palestinian demonstrators have gathered outside the venue in Copenhagen, where EU foreign affairs ministers are meeting, calling for the European Union to impose sanctions on Israel over the situation in Gaza. Listen into what one of the protesters had to say.
Want all the EU countries, all the EU leaders to take action and to do as much as possible, as much as they can to stop this genocide. And what they can do is they can make sanctions on Israel.
Meanwhile, in Gaza City, Palestinians are grieving the deaths of 6 people who were killed while waiting for aid near the Zikim border crossing. Listen in.
للقلة ما فيش أكل ولا في شرب ولا في أي حاجة والحياة غالية ما أنت عارفين يعني الوضع الاقتصادي صعب وفيش مصاري وفيش كل حاجة غالية فعشان هيك يعني هو توجه يعني لزكيم على أساس يحصل على معونة يعني أو كيس طحين أو معلبات زي ما بيجيبوا الأولاد فشوف الأولاد طبعا بروحوا بيجيبوا فهو يعني توجه بالطريقة هذا على أساس إنه هذا نصيبه إنه يستشهد.
يروحوا على زكيمي يروحوا عموما أخويا مش تاجر ولا أخويا كان يروح يسرق زي ما الكل بيحكي تحت ظروف الاحتياج. اضطر أخويا يروح. الاحتياج بتنوع من شخص لآخر. ممكن هو أمن الطحين احتاج معلبات، المعلبات مش موجودة إلا في زكيم أو في السوق بالأموال الطائلة.
Meanwhile, as per reports, Israeli security officials have said that the evacuation of Gaza City ahead of the IDF's planned offensive is progressing slower than expected. In the 3 weeks since Israel announced it would evacuate civilians, only about 10,000 people have moved south. An estimated 1 million people remain in the area. With us in the broadcast is Mr. Scott Faulkner, head of Eagle Enterprises, which is a security firm. Mr. Faulkner, I want to understand from your perspective, how do you see Israel's plans of evacuation really panning out?
A lot of it really relates to how much the Hamas terrorists are trying to use the civilians in Gaza City as human shields. They know that everyone who's been following this event since the tragedy of October 7th, now almost 2 years ago, the whole concept of how do you eliminate Hamas as a terror threat, and a lot of people would like, especially Hamas, would like to have the different attacks end because they want to reconstitute and be a threat to Israel in the future. And Israel wants to eliminate this threat once and for all. Urban warfare, going back centuries, is a horrible, horrible thing. And Israel's been trying to evacuate the civilians in Gaza City because they know that until they take that area over, Hamas has an opportunity to plant new seeds and regrow and become a threat in the future. And so it's a tragedy, but just like every warfare, urban warfare is always a tragedy. The key is to remember that Hamas brought it on themselves, and a lot of people in the Gaza Strip supported Hamas, allowed them to build tunnels, allowed them to build bunkers within hospitals and mosques and schools, and they really should rise up against the terrorists in their own right.
Absolutely. Mr. Faulkner, thank you so much for joining us on NewsX World with that perspective, and that's all that we have time for. We will continue to bring you more updates from around the world on the other side. Stay tuned.